The tale unfolds as the main character, Aram, undergoes a sudden and dramatic shift in her life. Struck by the infamous Trakoon, she finds herself transported to a fantastical realm known as Soul. However, this isn't the typical teleportation that bestows superpowers upon the protagonist. Instead, Aram becomes entangled in a dark situation, captured by slavers who auction her off as a vampire. Despite the fantastical setting, Aram possesses no supernatural abilities, and her new reality is far from the typical hero's journey. The auctioneer sets her price at 1,500 gold pieces, labeling her as a vampire in a world where such creatures are feared. Unfortunately, no buyers show interest, as vampires are considered too spooky. Ultimately, she is purchased by the House of Duke and escorted to the palace. Throughout this bewildering journey, Aram is visibly shaken, her fear and confusion apparent as she grapples with the abrupt changes in her life. The Duke's representative warns her about the dangerous nature of Duke Millard, emphasizing that he might devour her if displeased. Expecting a ferocious beast, Aram is shocked when she finally meets Duke Millard, who turns out to be a surprisingly pleasant man. Curious, he asks her if she is truly a vampire. In her confusion, she denies it, and that's when Millard's excitement turns into utter disappointment. It turns out Duke Millard had unknowingly purchased a vampire from a mystical equivalent of Wishcom, the budget-friendly alternative to genuine supernatural creatures. Realizing he had been scammed, Millard is left speechless. He had spent a small fortune expecting a creature of the night, only to receive someone with 0 vampire perks. In a sudden brainwave, Millard beckons her closer. Cautiously, Aram approaches, only for the eccentric Duke to seize her hand and bite it. To his horror, her blood tastes awful, causing him to spit it out immediately. Aram, bewildered and confused, wonders why this oddball is gnawing on her hand. She begins to worry that Millard might decide to kill her due to her subpar blood. Meanwhile, Millard scratches his head, puzzled by what kind of creature Aram could be. Not quite human, but certainly not a vampire. As he contemplates the situation, Aram realizes her best shot at survival is to offer her services. She pleads, claiming she's excellent at cleaning and laundry. However, Millard dismissively declares he has no need for that. Frustrated, Aram threatens to spill the beans about the scam. After some relentless pleading and negotiating, Duke Millard reluctantly agrees to keep her on as a maid. Escorted to her room by another maid, Aram finds solace in her tears, reminiscing about the family she has left behind. The next morning, Aram was greeted with a maid uniform, transforming her into the spitting image of a stereotypical maid. Baffled, she wondered why, in a place that supposedly hated vampires, they still had one serving them. Her first task of the day was to find the missing piece of a puzzle Duke Millard had been working on. Miraculously, she discovered it under his bed. Now entrusted with a new mission, Aram was asked to move some books to the study. The only problem, she had no idea where the study was. When she returned to Duke's room to ask for guidance, a knife whizzed past her head. With dramatic flair, Duke Millard pinned her against the wall, demanding to know who had given her permission to invade his space. Face to face with the imposing Duke, Aram felt her cheeks turn into mini Niagara Falls. Panicking, she stammered out an apology, which led the Duke to summon his right-hand man, Logan. Apparently Logan was the one who had won her at the auction for Duke Millard. Taking on the role of tour guide, Logan led Aram through the labyrinthine halls of the mansion. However, their grand tour was abruptly interrupted by a random maid, who whisked Aram away to the kitchen. There, she was entrusted with a new task, delivering a meal to Duke Millard. As Aram approached Millard's table, ready to carry out her culinary mission, he suddenly changed the script and ordered her to take a seat. Surprised, Aram complied. In the midst of the meal, with an air of suspicion, she suggested taste-testing the food for poison. Millard, seemingly unconcerned, agreed. But as Aram sampled the cuisine, Millard's keen vampire eyes spotted a bloodstain on her foot. Logan was quickly summoned to escort her to the medic. In the medical room, Aram met Marin, who wasted no time asking her age. A suspicious question. As they chatted, Aram couldn't help but notice Marin's striking resemblance to Harley Quinn from that Joker movie. After bandaging her wound, Marin sent her on her way. In a burst of whimsy, Millard gave Aram yet another unusual task, counting the number of times the word Miller appeared in a book. Aram dove into the literary challenge, working diligently and proudly presenting a grand total of 1,068. Little did she know, Millard was slightly taken aback by her accuracy, triggering a nostalgic flashback. As a child, he had been locked in a room with the same tedious counting chore. As the days rolled on, Aram found herself settling into the routine, though she still approached the food with caution, as if it held the secrets of the universe. She was also becoming quite familiar with Millard's temper, which seemed to revolve around an endless cycle of chores. One night, while delivering Millard's dinner, Aram sensed something was off. Concerned, she tried to act like a caring nurse, akin to friends trying to carry each other in a desperate unranked low-L game. Millard, however, brushed off her concern, ordering her to summon someone from the flora. Confused by the term, Aram sought guidance from the other maids, only to be met with cold indifference and some old-fashioned trash talk, fueled by their jealousy over her growing rapport with Millard. Undeterred, she approached the head maid and relayed Millard's request. Still baffled by what the flora was, she sought clarification from Ard, who was just as unhelpful. Later that night, Millard assigned her another task, reading out dates. But in a mild act of rebellion, Aram began to complain. The head maid barged in with urgent news, leading them to a room where Aram was instructed to fetch Marin. As they walked, Marin couldn't resist letting out some jealousy-laden complaints. Together they entered the room where Millard awaited, but, to Aram's surprise, a pink-haired person, who looked more like a femboy than a maid, was sitting on the bed. The figure introduced herself as Rose and, with a sly wink, inquired if Millard had found a partner for channeling his energy. Rose then dropped a bombshell about something called a decree hearing, leaving Aram utterly confused. Who knew vampire politics could be so convoluted? It turned out that the decree was akin to mortal-immortal marriage, with an added twist. If the mortal spouse managed to off the vampire duke, they would hit the jackpot of wealth. Talk about a financial plan with a deadly twist. Upon discovering this vampire matrimony hack from Rose, Aram realized that Millard had mistaken her kindness for an attempt at a decree partnership. Determined to clear things up, she bravely ventured into Millard's ominous room. In the shadow of his dark aura, she hesitated before mustering the courage to spill the tea. She clarified that she was only there to serve him out of goodwill and had no decree ambitions whatsoever. Rather than a stern response, Millard, captivated by her humble explanation, burst into laughter. The usually ferocious Duke, in an uncharacteristically gentle gesture, called her closer and patted her on the head like a fluffy kitten. The next day at the office, Aram decided to flaunt her creativity by crafting a paper crane. Little did she know, this innocent attempt at origami would backfire. Millard, eyeing the paper masterpiece, declared she should mass-produce them. Seeing his newfound interest, Aram suggested they team up for efficiency. After all, 2 cranes are better than 1, right? Initially reluctant due to his pride, Aram eventually gave in after witnessing Aram's crane-folding finesse. Once he was hooked, there was no turning back. Later that day, Aram stumbled upon the palace chapel, captivated by its beauty. The Pope, with his majestic presence, appeared to be the epitome of holiness. However, the initial charm faded quickly as the sermon transformed into what felt like a historical reenactment class. Yawn. Inducing, to say the least. The Pope then brought out a bucket containing a glowing holy concoction. Aram, wide-eyed, couldn't believe what she was seeing. The Pope invited attendees forward for a blessing. When it was Aram's turn, she chatted with him and found him surprisingly friendly, though she couldn't shake the feeling that he was a bit suspicious. The Pope inquired about Aram's backstory, but she skillfully dodged the question, claiming she had a date with Millard. Amused, the Pope, who revealed he had the same plans, suggested they go together. Arriving at Millard's room, the Pope proposed that Millard attend the blessing as well. However, Millard, acting like a bratty kid, initially declined. Instead, he opted for the more sophisticated activity of folding paper cranes with Aram. Despite Aram secretly wishing the Pope would join them, Millard's stubbornness won out. But then, out of the blue, Millard changed his mind and decided to attend. The Pope, thrilled by the unexpected turn of events, asked if he could have a private chat with Aram. However, Millard, with the grace of a protective older sibling, refused the request and shooed the Pope away. Before leaving, the Pope left Aram with a cryptic message. If she ever needed anything, she should reach out to him. Puzzled, Aram wondered if the Pope knew more about her than she thought. As they sat down to fold more paper cranes, Aram couldn't contain her confusion and asked why the Pope had referred to Millard as an elder. Millard revealed they were blood, but with a significant age gap. 16 to 17 generations, to be precise. Aram's shock was palpable. Family reunions in vampire circles must be quite the event. As time passed, Aram found herself settling into the routines of the vampire mansion. One fateful night, her beauty sleep was rudely interrupted by the head maid, who instructed her to fetch Millard from his office and bring him to his bedroom. "Oh, and there might be a dead body involved," the maid added with a deadpan expression, advising Aram to act surprised. Now that was a wake-up call. Entering Millard's room, Aram encountered quite the scene. Millard, decked out like an overrated anime protagonist, sword in hand with a blood-stained floor. Millard, channeling the calm demeanor of Keanu Reeves, questioned her intrusion. Ignoring his inquiry, Aram casually suggested a wardrobe change before she cleaned him up. Baffled by her lack of fear, Millard asked why she wasn't more alarmed. Aram, in her signature low-key manner, explained that sometimes she found him scary, and sometimes she didn't. Smoothly shifting the conversation, she then asked for the lowdown on the bloodbath. The next day, as Millard lounged in his office, he noticed Aram acting oddly and couldn't resist asking her about it. Quick on her feet, Aram claimed she was planning to discuss her hometown with the Pope. Surprisingly, Millard granted her permission. In the chapel, Aram stood before the Pope, but the real star of the moment was Marin, who revealed Aram's mysterious origins. The Pope decided to play detective, placing his thumb on Aram's forehead, causing a mysterious light to shine. Convinced by the divine glow, the Pope declared that Aram was not a vampire. Well, that settled it. Vampires were officially off the table. It seemed like Aram had received the papal seal of approval. Then the Pope dropped a bombshell. Aram was neither human nor vampire, but something else. An empty shell. Curious, the Pope asked her to tell him more about herself, and Aram spilled the details like a clumsy waiter dropping a tray of drinks. Returning to Millard's office, she told him what had happened. In an oddly possessive mood, Millard bit his finger and left a bloody mark on her forehead. As if that weren't strange enough, he handed her a book titled Research on Blood Collection. The kind of book that might get you side-aimed at a library. Millard warned her that it was a banned and dangerous book. Panicked, Aram questioned why he'd give her such a thing. Millard claimed it was about vampires and urged her to read it. Little did she know, the book was a hot potato brought to Millard by assassins who had failed miserably in their attempt to take him down. That night, Logan dropped another bombshell. Count Freyner, the banned book enthusiast, had committed suicide, leaving a note blaming Millard. Now officially part of the vampire drama, Aram tagged along with Millard to the funeral. Freyner's son, however, wasn't in the mood for pleasantries, angrily blaming everything on Millard, but our unfazed Giga-Chad Millard paid his respects and dipped. On their way back, they swung by a jewelry store, where Millard told Aram to wait outside. As she stood there, a mysterious woman approached, eager to know more about Millard. Aram painted a vivid picture of him, like Picasso with words. Back at the palace and ready for maid duties, the head maid decided to pull a classic prank on Aram, sending her on an egg-fetching mission, only for Aram to find herself grabbing at thin air. Suddenly, a shadow emerged from the back door and snatched her, leaving behind just a lone shoe. When Aram woke up, she found herself in a wooden cabin, face to face with none other than the femboy-looking man, Urian Miller, the same Urian whose name she had counted in the Imperial family book. Talk about a weird family reunion. Fearful but trying to keep her cool, Aram listened as Urian promised to return her home if she answered some questions truthfully. Sensing her anxiety, Urian called his servant, who had brought her there. In a bizarre display of loyalty, or perhaps insanity, the servant poured hot coffee on his own head as a form of apology. And then, as if it were just another ordinary day, Urian casually ordered the poor soul's execution. As chaos was about to be unleashed, Aram, in an act of mercy, screamed for him to stop. Urian's twisted smile and response hinted at an even darker side lurking beneath the surface. He then spilled the beans on his real intentions. He wanted Aram to enter into a decree with Millard. To sweeten the deal, he dangled a hefty price for her cooperation. However, even in the midst of the madness, Aram saw through Urian's slimy facade. Back in the Duke's office, Millard was in full detective mode with the head maid, extracting every detail about Aram's connection to the head king. The head maid revealed Aram's current whereabouts: the Torring cabin. With determination, Millard marched toward the door, ready to reclaim what was his. The head maid, noticing his possessiveness, told him that she also wanted to know what Aram would choose, and if she'd be willing to betray him. Millard, sensing a potential love triangle, demanded that the head maid leave. Sitting back in his chair, he was convinced that the dashing Rizzler Urian had nefarious plans to charm Aram and snatch her away. After all, the man was undeniably handsome.